EduSnap presents Understanding COPD.
We take thousands of breaths every single day. For a healthy person, it is a perfectly automatic, subconscious reflex. Expanding the lungs and drawing in oxygen requires zero conscious effort, burning virtually no active energy. In the United States, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, is the third leading cause of death, affecting over 13.5 million Americans. Though predominantly diagnosed in middle-aged men, this demographic split reveals that more women actually die from the disease each year. Yet, despite its massive scale, COPD often begins entirely free of symptoms. A patient can carry the disease for years without a single cough or noticeable shortness of breath. Because it incubates in silence, patients rarely realize their internal systems are failing until the physical damage is already severe. COPD is actually an umbrella medical term. It primarily describes two intertwined breathing conditions, chronic bronchitis and emphysema. The common public assumption about respiratory failure is that the patient simply cannot inhale enough fresh oxygen, but COPD operates in reverse. It is a disease that physically traps old, stale air inside the human body. To understand how lungs can turn into a one-way trap, we first have to reverse engineer the biological architecture of a healthy respiratory system. Looking at this diagram of the airway system, you can track the downward flow of inhaled air. It travels down the windpipe, into the bronchial tubes, and continues to branch out into smaller and smaller tubes called bronchioles. At the very end of these microscopic branches sit billions of tiny air sacs known as alveoli. They are tightly wrapped in a rich supply of blood vessels. The walls of these air sacs are naturally flexible. When you inhale, that healthy lung tissue easily stretches outward, filling like a cluster of tiny balloons. The exhalation is where the mechanics matter most. Because the tissue is highly elastic, those sacs automatically snap back to their original shape. This physical contraction transfers fresh oxygen into the bloodstream while forcefully pushing old air back up and out of the body. This microscopic elasticity is the crucial engine of human breathing. It is exactly what makes clearing your lungs a zero-energy task. That elasticity is completely dismantled by specific environmental culprits. Cigarette smoking is the leading cause of this structural damage, followed closely by long-term exposure to secondhand smoke and generalized air pollution. Heavy occupational triggers, like breathing in workplace fumes or biomass exposure from wood smoke, also break down the tissue over time. In rare instances, a genetic disorder known as alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency will initiate the exact same mechanical breakdown without any environmental triggers at all. These inputs are not temporary irritants. They act as corrosive agents, steadily and permanently dissolving the physical architecture of the respiratory system. The breakdown happens in distinct phases. First, the airways leading down to the sacs become permanently thick and inflamed, constantly producing an excess of heavy mucus that clogs the tubes. Next, the corrosive inputs eat away at the walls of the alveoli themselves. The tight clusters become floppy, the walls break open, and the sacs permanently lose their rigid, structured shape. Without that vital elasticity, the physics of breathing collapse. When inhaled air stretches the damaged tissue, the lung refuses to shrink back down. Because the lungs cannot organically deflate, old air remains stuck in the enlarged spaces. When the patient tries to take their next breath, the fresh oxygen has nowhere to go. The physical space is already occupied. To compensate for the loss of automatic elasticity, the patient has to consciously recruit their chest and core muscles just to squeeze that trapped air out. Now, breathing goes from a subconscious reflex to a high-energy physical workout. Every single exhalation requires manual force, directly causing the severe fatigue, weight loss, and muscle deterioration experienced by COPD patients. Because the destruction of the alveoli is a physical and structural failure, it cannot be reversed. There is currently no cure for COPD. Left unmanaged, the disease moves along a steady progression track. As the internal mechanics break down further, patients advance from mild to moderate to severe stages. The external symptoms escalate alongside the internal breakdown. Patients develop a chronic cough,
heavy mucus buildup, and aggressive wheezing and chest tightness, particularly during exercise. Eventually, the structural collapse compounds on itself. The sheer energy required just to empty the lungs makes simple, everyday routines like climbing a flight of stairs or putting on clothes impossibly exhausting. While the existing physical damage is permanent, the rapid progression of the disease is not inevitable. The most critical intervention a patient can make is quitting smoking. From there, behavioral changes like pulmonary rehabilitation, routine exercise, and a healthy diet can maximize the efficiency of the remaining lung capacity and stall further structural decay. Damaged lungs struggle to clear themselves out, making patients incredibly vulnerable to routine respiratory infections. Catching influenza or pneumonia can be devastating to a compromised system, making up-to-date vaccinations a strict requirement. Understanding exactly how COPD physically alters the lungs strips away the mystery. It reframes a daunting diagnosis into a manageable structural problem, giving millions of people a clear blueprint to reclaim their active lives.